Tick-tock, time to rock. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon to everyone who's watching from all over the world. I'm your friendly neighborhood philosopher, D. Wood, and with me now is the man who started it all. Were you the first person to ever talk about jihad?
Yeah, I think so. There were people talking about terrorism. I was the first one to say, hey, wait a minute, this is all jihad.
This is jihad.
Yes.
Yeah, and then once the news spread about jihad, then we got the campaigns from organizations like CARE informing us all of what jihad actually is, and what is it according to the Muslim organizations who want to correct us?
Well, they say my jihad is getting the kids to school on time and getting to the gym and staying fit.
And ladies and gentlemen, he's not exaggerating here. Let me put a couple of these up on the screen. This is an ad campaign. My jihad is to never settle short of my best effort. What's yours? My jihad is not to judge people by their cover. What's yours? And we can look at more. I need to just get all these ads. My jihad is to build friendships across the aisle. My jihad is to stay fit despite my busy schedule. So jihad, now Robert, I mean, the word jihad does just mean struggle, right? So
right. Technically, all these things are right. The only thing is, in Islamic theology, jihad has a very specific meaning that is not encompassed by any of the examples that you just read. And that is the great dishonesty of the CARE campaign, that they do not give Americans any indication whatsoever that jihad, if you say it in the context of Islamic texts and teachings and Islamic law, it has a very specific meaning. And that meaning involves warfare against unbelievers.
Well, I mean, Robert, I don't mean to correct you, but I've seen all of these signs and they say that jihad is just any kind of struggle. So, like, some of you may have noticed that, I got a haircut. I went and got a haircut at 11 this morning, and I don't even like getting haircuts. And so it was kind of a struggle. So that's my jihad. What's yours?
Well, David, the other night there were some people over, and it was a very convivial evening, and some people decided to order a pizza. And, I love pizza, but I thought, I really better not. It's getting late. No good to be overeating. And so I did not accept the invitation of a slice of pizza. That's my jihad.
Alhamdulillah. Robert Spencer is a jihadi. Hey, Hamas. Right. Hey, Hamas, send us our checks. We're jihadis. We've waged jihad.
That's right.
Quick question quick comment before we get started here. David, I have some Muslim friends and I want to talk to them about the gospel, but I'm not sure where to start. I have made videos like that in the past. Check out my video. What's it called? How to share unpleasant facts with pleasant Muslims. There, it's the focus in that video is more along the lines of how do you bring up some of these sensitive issues like, Muhammad and Aisha and so on with Muslims who aren't being offensive in any way. But a lot of the same things would apply as far as starting off a conversation and so on. So go ahead and check that out and get back to us. All right, Robert. Well, I haven't seen any jihad in the news as far as I can tell. So I'm assuming that you have nothing for us, and you're about to say that you have nothing for us, and we can all go home.
Yeah, I only have 49 tabs open, so it was really very little jihad this past week.
Hold on. You're telling us that in a week where I've heard nothing about jihad, that there are at least 49 stories of jihad that I didn't hear about.
At least, because I cull these out of the week's worth of Jihad Watch posts. There's some things I think, well, that's just not the kind of thing we generally talk about. I leave that aside. Some of the things have to do with related but peripheral issues. I leave those aside. Just leaving us the core jihad stories, like one from Serbia. You don't often get one from Serbia. So let's start with Serbia tonight, David. A convert to Islam whose name was not given but he was identified as a Serbian Wahhabi. He plotted to mow down people in the city center of Belgrade, driving a truck. Of course, we've seen vehicular jihad attacks in many countries of the world in the recent past. And of course, we've also seen many converts to Islam joining the jihad. It is something that I believe we've discussed before, that it's a recurring phenomenon that no authorities anywhere in the world seem to have any interest in, and that is that so many converts to Islam somehow get the idea that their religion involves warfare against unbelievers. And this poor devil in Serbia is the latest example.
Yeah, it is. I mean, you would expect, if it's just a matter of someone converting to something or just a matter of people getting the idea to mow people down with their vehicles, you wouldn't expect so many of those instances to come from one ideology, right? I mean, you occasionally do have someone who will drive into a crowd or something like that, but it's just a person who's insane or extremely angry over something, not part of some global movement where everyone keeps adopting the same methods and strategies for the same reasons. Very, very strange. I did have to point out this awesome comment. Is Robert always in a suit? Oh, always. That's just his jihad. That's got to be a struggle. I mean, I'm wearing pajama. I have a T-shirt on, but I wear pajama I've worn pajama bottoms for almost all of the COVID lockdown. So I can't imagine wearing a suit the entire time.
David, I'll tell you, I actually considered today not wearing a suit for this, but it was too much of a struggle. I failed. My jihad was a failure, and I got into the suit as usual.
It would be so. It's a struggle. If it's a struggle to wear a suit every day, but it'd be a struggle to change. So no matter what happens, it's your jihad.
Far more of a struggle not to wear one at this point.
Wow.
All right.
The jihadi struggle is real. All right, go ahead.
Okay, let's go to Afghanistan. There was a couple that was accused of sex outside marriage. They were taken to a Sharia court and summarily stoned to death in the Badakhshan province. And of course, this is jihad, even though no unbelievers are involved, because the people involved were implementing Islamic law, which is the goal of all jihad. Mm-hmm. That is, the Islamic law that led to the stoning to death of this couple is the same Islamic law that jihadis are fighting in order to implement all over the world. And that's why they wage jihad.
And people like Ali Dawa are proud of that. And I guess it's no surprise, Robert, why people were literally hanging onto the side of U.S. planes in order to get out of that place.
Well, yeah, because nobody wants to live under Sharia, even many Muslims, because they know what it's like, and they would rather, even though they will pay lip service to it, they'd rather live under virtually any other system. And yes, the video out of Afghanistan indicates that, and there are many other examples. Another one out of Afghanistan was a Taliban judge who said recently that women cannot be judges because they have lesser brains.
No, and, where would they get that idea, Robert? I mean, come on.
Where indeed, David? It comes from, oddly enough, a hadith attributed to Muhammad in which he says that most of the people in hell are women. And the reason why most of the people in hell are women is because they are deficient in intellect and deficient in religion.
And that's also the basis for saying that the testimony of women is half as reliable as the testimony of man. He said it's the deficiency of their intellect.
That's what they asked him, actually. What do you mean deficient in intellect and deficient in religion? And he explained, he invoked exactly that passage of the Quran that he himself had made up, saying that you needed 2 women to equal the testimony of 1 man. And that's the deficiency in intellect. And then the deficiency in religion is that during the menstrual period, they can't go to mosque and pray in the mosque. Therefore, they're deficient in religion. Therefore, most women are in hell. Therefore, the Taliban judge says women have lesser brains, can't be judges.
And here's the sad situation. The Taliban hasn't been in control of Afghanistan for a while. But a lot of these groups, like Al-Shabaab and Boko Haram and Al-Qaeda and, of course, ISIS and the Taliban, a lot of these groups, we know what will happen if they win. And we spend years of our lives saying, guys, you need to be careful because if these guys win, here's what's going to happen. And we're called racists, we're called bigots, we're called Islamophobes, we're told that has nothing to do with Islam. And as soon as one of these groups wins, bam, exactly what we said would happen happens. And now there are people in the real world suffering for this when for decades we've just been told to shut up. Just shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up. And then, oh my goodness, what's happening over there in Afghanistan? How could this have happened? We had no clue. Come on. My goodness.
And you know something else, David, ancillary to the Afghanistan stories this week is the revelation that at least 50 Afghan refugees with potentially serious security concerns have been already released into the United States and nobody knows where they are. And the problem is many of these people will carry the same attitudes, the same views, because they believe that Sharia is the divine law in the United States as much as it is in Afghanistan. They will come here and the same thing exactly will happen. Just like you say, we can tell you exactly what will happen. Nobody will believe it and will be called racists and bigots. And then it will happen and nobody will remember that we said it.
Yep. Yeah, and it's, I mean, my goodness, when we say, here's what will happen if the people who want to implement Sharia ever get the ability to do so, we're basing our claims on the Quran, Muhammad's commands in the Hadith, 14 centuries of experience, 14 centuries of history, 14 centuries of Islamic scholarship, and the people who call us liars and bigots and Islamophobes, they're basing it on, well, I have a Muslim friend and he doesn't believe that, so you guys are wrong. And it's so stupid. He's the
gentlest soul in the world. He wouldn't hurt a fly. So therefore, Islam must be peaceful.
What a world.
We are talking, ladies and gentlemen, in case there's any confusion about that, we're talking about the teachings of Islamic law and the contents of Islamic texts. Mm-hmm. That has no necessary connection to the behavior of any given Muslim individual. Because every individual of every creed has a variety of priorities, a variety of perspectives. And it is not a given that there's going to be a one-to-one correlation between religious texts and the behavior of any given individual. But this is constantly confused and obfuscated, I think, by people with malevolent intent who want to say that if you criticize Islamic texts and teachings, you hate Muslims and are trying to get them attacked. That's really the idea here, that they're assuming that every Muslim is going to be violent if Islam teaches violence. That is not at all the case.
Yeah, it would be like me saying, hey, Jesus said, love your enemies. Oh, therefore, since you said that's what Jesus said, you must be saying that every Christian in the world loves his enemies. No, I wouldn't be saying anything about every Christian in the world. I'd be saying something about what Jesus said, and whether Christians actually do what he says, completely different story. Likewise, exactly. Muhammad said things like kill apostates, or you can beat your wives into submission. Your Muslim friend might be the nicest person, nicest, gentlest person in the world. He might be, and a lot of your Muslim friends, if you have Muslim friends, a lot of them are probably nicer guys than Robert Spencer and David Wood, who...
How could anybody be a nicer guy than David Wood?
I don't know, but anyway, I've heard that it happens. Anyway, so the point is, we're not talking about specific people. We're talking about the teachings and commands of Allah and Muhammad and the people who actually implement those teachings, which is where we get jihad, which is what this show is about.
Very interesting story out of Qatar this week, David, and it's multifaceted. Let's see here. Where to start? Paula Chieticat is a woman from Mexico who was working in Qatar, and she was sexually assaulted while she was sleeping in her apartment in Doha. A man came in and sexually assaulted her. She went to the police. The man denied having done anything, and so she was arrested for sex outside of marriage, because of course his testimony completely exonerated him, and then her accusation became self-incrimination because she obviously had done something. She said it. So she was sentenced to 100 lashes and 7 years in prison.
Guys, did you catch that? Because this is something we've seen this over and over and over again in the modern world from Muslim countries, and it's because of defects in Islamic law. If you want to accuse some man of committing adultery or something like that, you're supposed to have 4 witnesses, 4 male witnesses, but there are all sorts of ways that a woman can be implicated without having any witnesses. A woman can become pregnant, for instance, right? And she becomes pregnant, and she's pregnant out of wedlock or something like this. And then there's, hey, you've committed fornication. You obviously did. The man denies it, and so you obviously don't have the 4 witnesses against the guy. But here you have the woman, and here you have a woman who is going to police. Hey, some guy just raped me. And it's, oh, do you have 4 male witnesses that he raped you? No, I don't. Well, you've admitted to having sex, haven't you? So get ready for your lashes. And we condemn this, and we're the bigots and Islamophobes for having a problem with this.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, the person who pointed this out in connection with this case is none other than the victim, Paula Schieticat, who tweeted on February 19th, "Las injusticias no se responden con Islamofobia." That is, injustices are not answered with Islamophobia. Which means if she knew that we were talking about her in this case and criticizing Islamic law in connection with the fact that she's gotten 7 years in prison for being the victim of a sexual assault, she would blame us for causing this trouble for her.
Yeah, and
not the people who put her in prison.
Yeah.
Not the people who are going to lash her, but us.
Yeah, and guys, we know it can hurt and can hurt things you love. If you happen to love Islamic law or something, we know that it can hurt to expose evil, but sometimes you just have to expose it anyway, right? I mean, when there were abuses in the Catholic Church, lots of people didn't want to report stuff because they didn't want the church to get a bad reputation like that. Well, guess what? Some problems are never going to be fixed until they're brought out into the open. And so you have to expose that. You have to expose that stuff so people can clean it up and get the guilty people out of there. Same thing with Islam. But in this situation, it's actually exposing the teachings of Muhammad and the Quran that actually lead to this stuff.
Exactly. So it's unfortunate that Paula Schieticat herself doesn't seem to understand that it's not hating Islam or hating Muslims to speak the truth about the reasons why these things happen to her. And if we don't talk about them, as you noted, it's just going to keep happening. And there have been so many other stories like that. It's clear this is going to keep happening. It's based on Islamic law.
And I've seen the same thing with Malala. Where she would condemn people for criticizing Islam or for exposing instances of jihad. When she was shot in the head, wasn't it, for wanting to go to school, versus people who thought, hey, you're not supposed to. Your job is to be a baby making machine, not to be getting an education, which is going to give you all sorts of silly ideas about what you're capable of in this world. So.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of education, let's visit the hijab school controversy on the Indian subcontinent. We talked about this last week, David.
Hey, before you actually get started, I want to say,
yes, sir.
Muslims of the world, if this were people, government, whoever, and they were oppressing you by telling you can't wear things that are associated with your religion, there are people like me who would actually be on your side. As much as I criticize Islam, I would be on your side. But whenever one of these issues comes up, it turns out that it's being made into an issue, but when it wasn't supposed to be really a big issue. But there are groups trying to bring it forward as an issue so they can start a bloodbath, and then it's like, I don't know. So Robert, the point was, I have no clue what you're going to say, but I'm guessing it's got some bloodbath consequences of What's going on in India?
You guessed it, David. This one comes from Bangladesh to start off with, and mobs gathered outside schools in large numbers in Dhaka in order to protest against the hijab ban in Indian schools, even though, of course, there's no hijab ban in Bangladesh. And they screamed Allahu Akbar, and one of the spokesmen of this demo actually said, not a single Bangladeshi Hindu woman should come outside of their homes and walk on the street with a religious symbol like shaka or sindoor, which are Hindu religious symbols. The implication being that if they did, they could be brutalized or even killed. Now, of course, there's no prohibition on Muslim women wearing hijab walking down the street in India. Mm-hmm. The controversy is over school uniforms.
And I think it's only in class. It's only in class, right?
Yes, that's right. And so the guy is saying he's ratcheting up the ante quite considerably by saying a Hindu woman goes outside in Bangladesh, she's going to have trouble. And so that is in the neighboring country. In India itself, a Hindu activist named Harsha was murdered this past week after speaking out in favor of the Indian government's position on the school uniforms and no hijabs in the school uniforms. And it turns out he had been also accused of blasphemy as far back as 2015 by Muslims. And at his funeral procession, Muslims showed up and threw stones at the mourners and at the vehicles of the mourners and the people around, damaging 20 vehicles and also throwing stones at the police. So once again, we see, like you noted, there may be a case here that as far as individual liberty or something like that goes, they may be in the right.
Yeah.
At the same time, they undermine their own case by upping the ante and going and resorting to violence and threats so quickly and easily.
Yeah, and I mean, notice if we were in the United States or Canada and some school had some rule against head coverings or something like that, you'd bring that up with the school and try to get the rules changed and so on. You don't start a bloodbath over it. You make your case and explain why they're wrong, and you get other people involved and you move higher up the chain and so on until you are allowed to wear what you want to wear. But going back to what you said before, because this is related to lots of things that we've seen over the years, this idea, hey, in India, a school is saying that in class you can't wear head coverings. So in class, and once they get outside the class, they can wear whatever they want. But in class, there's no head coverings. This is the rule, and all of a sudden it becomes a big media issue. And in response, people in a completely different country will say, "All right, any Hindu who steps out the house, wearing a head covering from their religion, what's going to happen." But we've seen that over and over again. They posted some cartoons over here or something, and you get a bloodbath. Oh, this guy over here, he published a book called The Satanic Verses. Therefore, everyone's fair game all over the planet. It's just very strange, and I'm glad that most people outside of that school of thought don't think like that. I mean, just imagine if someone, they did something to a U.S. soldier over there in that country. Oh, it's open season on anyone. Like, that would be insane. And yet, yes, we see it over and over and over again.
It's actually, we saw it just recently in Texas with the synagogue hostage taking. The guy thought, okay, I want to get this jihadi freed. How can I do it? The Jews control the world, so I'll go to the Jews, and they will contact the leading Jews and get the jihadi released. It was total fantasy, but based on Islamic theology and teachings in the Quran about the Jews and how they're schemers and so on.
And if we try to expose those teachings so that we don't end up with the real world consequences, we're the bad guys. We're the bad guys. Always. Strange stuff.
Of course we are. Interesting story also out of India. A lot of implications to this one. Safdar Nagori was one of 38 people convicted for their role in a series of bombings in Ahmedabad in 2008 that killed 56 people, jihad bombings. And Safdar Nagori, when he was sentenced to death in Bhopal Central Jail, in Ahmedabad Special Court, he said, "The Constitution does not count for me. For me, the decisions of the Quran are supreme. For me, the decisions of the Quran are supreme." I thought that was extraordinary because, of course, all Western authorities, non-Muslim authorities, continue to insist that terrorism has nothing to do with Islam. And it's only twisting and hijacking the teachings of Islam that you get terrorism. And yet, the terrorists themselves constantly refer back to the Quran and Muhammad and Islamic teaching. And Safdar Nagori is just the latest example of that.
Yeah, and I keep posting about that on Twitter. I'll say, here's what Allah says, here's what Muhammad says, here's what 14 centuries of Muslim scholars have said, here's me saying, hey, this is what Islam teaches, and then it's, David, you Islamophobe, you bigot for saying that. It's like, can't even repeat what all of your guys say.
You know, that goes back years, actually. I remember when the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is 56 Muslim governments around the world, plus the Palestinian Authority, they started their big Islamophobia initiative to try to get the West to adopt hate speech laws, criminalizing criticism of Islam. I was featuring pretty regularly in what they called their Islamophobia Observatory, which was kind of a regular publication that they would put out about these terrible Islamophobes. And I would see quotes from me in there that were quotes from imams that I had just quoted at Jihad Watch.
Yeah.
When the imam says it, it's fine. It's only when I note what he says, it crosses the line into an Islamophobia.
Yeah.
Hey, by the way, David, you know, we were talking about suits and ties and such earlier. I wanted to alert you to the fact that Dar Ululum Deoband, the famous seminary in India, which is the foundations for the Taliban's view of Islam, they ruled this past week that it is unlawful for Muslims to wear neckties, that the necktie is actually a Christian symbol. And so I think maybe you should think about wearing a suit and tie next week.
Yeah, I might have to. Hey, what if I wear a tuxedo every show? That would be kind of funny.
I'm not sure we'll have to ask Darul Uloom Deoband if that's okay. All right, let's go to Pakistan. A very sad story. A 25-year-old Christian named Parvez Masih was beaten to death by a group of Muslims. It was apparently not specifically a jihad attack, but rather a dispute over various issues that don't have anything to do with jihad. The problem is that here again, when you have a dispute in a country like Pakistan between Muslims and Christians, it is all too easy for the Muslims to call some of their friends and associates, form a mob, brutalize the non-Muslim, and then the police do nothing because generally they're afraid of being brutalized by the mob or they sympathize with the attackers.
I'm sure that's the only time we've ever heard that one too.
Yeah. Here's another one that we've never heard before. A social media star. I don't know exactly what she did to become a social media star. But in any case, Kandil Baloch in Pakistan was murdered by her brother a few years back for not living according to Islamic teachings. And he made a video, Wasim Baloch made a video saying that he was proud that he had killed her. Girls are born to stay home and follow traditions. My sister never did that. I drugged her first, then I killed her. Anyway, he was just freed from prison. Because, of course, these things are rooted in Islam, and there's just no problem with that kind of murder. You don't stay in prison for life for that.
Yeah, and I have to correct myself. That is a story I did see. Yep.
Yikes.
So, guy honor killing against his sister for not following the rules of Islam. Spent several years in prison, and then they overturned it, even though they knew what he did and he admitted it. Interesting stuff.
He's on video, made a confession on video. Okay, let's go to Italy. Bukhta el-Allam, who is a Moroccan who moved to Italy. He is an imam, and he was just indicted because he called for the destruction of the Vatican. Now, this, once again, is yet another story where we constantly hear that when we have Muslim migrants, they will leave all the aspects of Islam that contradict Western laws, principles, customs, and mores at the door when they come to the West. And yet again and again we see that that's not the case, and that many of the migrants come wanting to wage jihad in their new lands. This Imam Bukhta el-Allam is one example of that.
Yeah, and it's I mean, when you look at the actual statistics and so on, so they will actually do Pew Research polls and so on. Then they'll see in a place like Egypt, for instance, that whatever it was, something like 90% of the population believes that if someone leaves Islam, it should be a death sentence. It was like 85 or 90%, something like that. And so the idea of people, keep in mind, I don't have a problem with immigration, never have. I have a problem with being stupid about immigration, and the idea that, hey, if we just took a random sampling of people who want to leave Egypt and go into the UK, as soon as they get on the plane or boat or whatever and get to the UK, they're going to drop that belief that if anyone leaves Islam, he should be executed. No, that's ridiculous. That's a ridiculous idea. The only thing they might drop is that it should be implemented in the UK before the Ummah takes over, right? But unless they had some miraculous change along the way, they would be like Ali Dawah. Once we get control, then we're going to kill you critics. Then we're going to slaughter the apostles. Then we're going to do that stuff. Right now, maybe some terrorist attacks here and there, but we're not going to have any full implementation. But that's the goal. And so you take in people whose goal is ultimately to overthrow your government.
Indeed. Another indication of that comes out of France, where there are several gentlemen who are on trial now for complicity in the murder of Father Jacques Hamel, who was a Catholic priest in France. In 2016, he was murdered in his church in the middle of celebrating Mass. And one of his associates, Nicole Klein, testified the other day, "I remember the hoots of joy on the evening of the assassination in Saint-Étienne." And she says, so few that some say there was no such thing, but it was a fact. And also that people were driving through the town honking their horns in celebration that the priest had been murdered. This is an indication, obviously, that while there were no doubt some people who were horrified by this, others thought, well, this is jihad, and this is pleasing to Allah, and we should therefore celebrate that this has happened.
Good bit of reasoning there.
Another one out of France involves Mila. Mila is a young woman you may have heard of. She has gotten to be very famous and lives in hiding because she criticized Islam a few years back and was inundated, absolutely barraged with death threats. And recently she was walking along on the banks of the Rhone River in Lyon, which sounds very romantic, but she actually filmed Muslims walking by and making obscene gestures in her direction and spitting at her. And so you think, oh, well, they must know who she is. It's a wonder that she didn't get killed. But then she explained they did not know who she was. That's just how they treat any woman who is walking around unveiled. And this is not Saudi Arabia. This is France.
And so this is the massive double standards that we always see. Keep in mind, as I've said 1,000 times before, ladies, if you want to wear a hijab, you can wear a hijab all day long. You'll never hear a complaint about me. All I will ever do, the most you will ever hear from me, is pointing out that the Quran says why you're supposed to wear the hijab. It's to avoid being molested, which makes it sound like it's okay to molest you if you're not wearing a hijab. So I'll point out
and
that.
That's certainly the understanding that many Muslims get, that it's okay to molest a woman who's not wearing hijab.
Yeah, and it's because of that. So it's not something they're not born some perverted way or something like that. Their God tells them that, and so I'm saying this as someone who has places a high value on personal freedom and deciding what you want to do and how you want to dress and things like that. The hypocrisy is just it's unbearable. This idea of, hey, whatever our community decides we want to do, the entire world needs to respect it, never question anything about it, never criticize, definitely never implement any rule against anything we want. Meanwhile, we can show utter contempt for the rest of you. And if you do not adopt our rules and we can treat you like absolute garbage. That's what it looks like. That's what it looks like.
Yep.
And then we're told if you have any sort of problem with that, then you're a bigot. If you have any sort of problem with this hypocrisy, you must be a bigot.
You're a racist, bigoted Islamophobe. Another one out of France, and this is not a duplication from previous weeks. This is just something that happens a lot lately. A Muslim migrant in France entered a church during Mass, walked around playing rap music on his phone and screaming Allahu Akbar. Obviously, he intended to express his contempt for the Christian worship and to proclaim the superiority of Allah, which of course is what Allahu Akbar means. Allah is greater, primarily greater than your God, greater than your religion. Speaking also of being put on the defensive if you point out any of these unwelcome truths about Islam. The Sundance Film Festival, we discussed this a couple weeks ago, I believe, David. The Sundance Film Festival has now apologized for showing a film called Jihad Rehab, which is about a de-radicalization program in Saudi Arabia, because jihad is a spiritual struggle that has nothing to do with terrorism, you see.
That's what we say. That's what we say. We literally said that at the beginning of the show.
There you go. So because Sundance actually was so Islamophobic as to give the impression that jihad had something to do with terrorism, they have now backtracked and apologized after 2 Sundance officials resigned, and they have been inundated with charges of Islamophobia.
Well, that's good. They deserve it. I mean, here we are. We explain that anyone who commits actual jihad attacks is a misunderstander of Islam, and jihad is just this internal spiritual struggle against being out of shape and things like that. And then, my goodness, they make a movie. Gosh, sick people, man, sick people in this world.
The funny thing is, the really ironic thing is that the woman who made the movie explained that she wanted to show that the jihadis who were being rehabilitated were the real heroes, and that those who had put them in Guantanamo were the real terrorists. But because she said jihad, the whole thing has now been consigned to the dustbin of Islamophobia.
Wow.
Did you know, David, there was a fire set at Dearborn, Michigan's Al-Huda Islamic Association?
Yeah, we talked about that last week, and it turned out to be some other dude, right? A Muslim dude, right?
That's right. Turned out to be a Muslim named Ahmed Taki. And the FBI has now announced that they investigated this, and they discovered that Ahmed Taki had no political or ideological motivations. And so I just thought it was worth mentioning in light of the fact that Ahmed Taki is considered to have been mentally ill. And so that's the end of the story. But if a mentally ill non-Muslim had set fire to the mosque, this would be trumpeted as an instance of Islamophobia and we would probably never have heard the end of it up to this point.
Yeah, I dare say it would be in thousands of articles that Robert Spencer caused that attack, even if the guy was a complete nut, even if he was completely insane, even if police in their investigation figured out that he was insane and announced that he was insane, even if he was examined by mental health experts who concluded that he was insane and he had no agenda in any of it and he's just crazy, it would still be brought up thousands and thousands of times against
Like Craig Hicks.
Robert Spencer.
Exactly. Like Craig Hicks. You remember Craig Hicks?
No, who's that?
He's totally nuts. He's the guy who shot a couple of Muslims dead.
Oh, for the parking spot?
Right.
Yeah.
He was mad about the parking spot. And the thing is, not only does he not have any anti-Muslim, anti-Islam statements, he actually says he likes Muslims better than Christians. And he's very unhappy with Christianity. But he doesn't say anything negative about Islam at any time. And the Nihad Awad of Care says he made many statements against religion.
Yeah, Christianity.
And they constantly say that it was an Islamophobic attack, even though there's no evidence for that whatsoever. He was just a total nut.
Yeah, and it's another situation where if Islamophobia and anti-Muslim bigotry were really such a huge issue, why are most of the stories they use completely fake? They're completely fake stories. Oh, this guy attacked me in the subway and pulled my hijab, and it's fake. This guy, he made anti-religious statements and then killed some Muslims, so obviously it was because of that. No, the guy was a nutcase, and he was a hothead who would pull his gun out on people, and eventually he got fed up with them taking his parking spot and murdered them. So it's mass murder. Keep in mind, bad dude. I don't even know what happened to him, but life in prison definitely deserves that. If anyone deserves it, it's someone who will shoot someone over a parking spot. But what do we hear? You see, Robert Spencer, this guy, even though he never said one word about you, and if he had heard of you, he would have condemned you. Nevertheless, you convinced this man to go on a killing spree.
Yeah, it's always my fault.
Mm-hmm.
It's been for years. Anyway, David, it also works in the opposite direction, that when you have Muslims being entirely clear about what they are doing and why, then authorities will rush to exonerate them. What we have here is a man from Afghanistan, now in Germany, and he was in Dresden's main railway station, started chasing passengers with a knife, randomly attacking them, stabbing 3 people while screaming Allahu Akbar. And German authorities were able to overcome him, and now they are insisting this had nothing to do with extremism. In other words, it's not terrorism, it's not Islam, even though the very statement Allahu Akbar is an indication that it does have everything to do with Islam.
So just to recap here, Robert, if we've learned anything over all these years, you've been at it longer than I have, but I've been at it for a while, but all these years of covering these attacks, if we've learned anything, it's that if someone is slaughtering unbelievers in the name of Allah, the media and politicians and everyone will go out of their way to say that it has nothing to do with the stated motives of the attacker. But if anyone attacks Muslims for any reason, and if those reasons have absolutely nothing to do with the attacker being anti-Muslim, it will nevertheless be attributed to anti-Muslim sentiment and bigotry and Islamophobia, and inevitably you will be blamed for that. Is that about right?
That's about the size of it. As a matter of fact, recently the U.S. State Department has a virtual Iran embassy. There's no diplomatic relations between the United States and Iran, so they have no actual embassy in Tehran, but they have a virtual embassy. So if you want to visit the United States Embassy for Iran, it exists online. It doesn't exist in real life. And they recently featured a statement by Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States, accusing the United States of Islamophobia and saying this is a big problem that has to be tackled. And the work to address injustice wherever it exists remains the work ahead. It's hard to imagine how Iranians might react to that, thinking that the United States is full of Islamophobia, and here's the vice president herself saying so.
Hey, Robert, Iran, isn't that the place where you'll see tens of thousands of people gathered together screaming death to America?
That's the place. As a matter of fact, it's required in the mosques. Every Friday, when you go to mosque for the sermon, you have to scream death to America at the end of the festivities. It is required by the mullahs.
Wow. Well, we need to do something. We need to do something about that Islamophobia.
Yeah, it's a big problem. It's huge. Speaking of which, we have a bit of Islamophobia in Nigeria, real Islamophobia. 3 women were brought before a Sharia court in Zamfara state, one of the Sharia states in northern Nigeria. It turns out they were practicing witchcraft, and they carried out some sort of weird ritual where they stained the Quran with blood and then threw it in the toilet. That, of course, is blasphemy, and they were brought before the Sharia court. The ruling has not yet come down. But in any case, I think it's interesting that a Sharia court, obviously, if they want to enforce reverence for Islam and reverence for the Quran, that they would put people like this on trial. But what's striking is that the West, which is supposed to be non-religious and not have an established religion, acts exactly the same way, with the same kind of horror and indignation at people who treat the Quran as if it were just another book. And, of course, you are probably the most qualified person in the world to speak about this.
I am highly qualified in this particular field. I should be given some sort of second PhD as the world's leading authority on this.
So, have you gotten any, I suppose not at this point, that you haven't heard from any governing authorities?
Clarify, what do you mean?
Well, in terms of desecrating the Quran, eating the Quran, making origami out of the Quran,
you mean from our authorities or from
yeah, ours?
Oh, well, the FBI showed up one day, but they were cool. They weren't telling me to stop. They said
because years back when the famed pastor, he's kind of faded from view now, but Terry Jones, the pastor in Florida, I believe it was, he was going to burn the Quran. The State Department issued a statement. Obama denounced him. He actually got a call from David Petraeus, the head of the forces in Afghanistan, begging him not to carry this out because it would offend Muslims. And of course, this was apparently the highest priority that American officials had at that time.
Yeah, and you know, back then I was one of the guys who debated him. I had a public debate with him on whether that's a good way to be going about things. What a lot of people miss, and here's how the world has changed. What a lot of people miss is that when I do anything, guys, when you see me and it's like, oh my goodness, look at that line David just crossed. I have never crossed a line where it wasn't for some reason for me to make a point to someone who was crossing a line. So a lot of the stuff over the years that I've done was, hey, if you are going to do this, then I'm going to do this in response, and here's an example of what I'm going to do. And a lot of times that works. There was Muhammad Hijab. He was starting a campaign. This guy has hundreds of thousands of followers. He was starting a campaign among his followers to threaten the wives of critics of Islam with torture and rape. And he wants all his followers to go out there and threaten women with torture and rape. And my response was, actually, no, you're not going to do that. I'm going to stop you, and here's how I'm going to stop you. I'm going to implement Surah 6, verse 108 of the Quran, which tells me that if my threat my threat to insult your religion is big enough, you need to stop. You need to stop what you're doing. And he did. He stopped right there. We didn't hear any more about that stuff. And here's what's interesting, Robert, and this is why I'm saying this. Years ago, it would not have mattered why I was doing anything. I would have been condemned. Now, after all these years of all this nonsense going on, pretty much every Christian I've ever discussed that with The exception would be like James White, a couple of his fans, and so on. And I'm sure there are a few more here and there. But every Christian I've ever discussed it with, I've talked to like church people in the church and stuff. Like, hey, I heard you ate the Quran or something like that. And I go, did you hear why? No, I didn't hear why. And I explain it, and they'll go, oh yeah, that makes sense then. Yeah, you got to do that, right? I mean, it's like we're stopping a campaign of hundreds of thousands of people harassing women with threats of torture and rape, and I can pull out a page and chew it up, and I can stop it all right there. I'm going to stop that 100 times out of 100. There's no dispute about that. Anyway, that's just an example of how things have changed. But yeah, I did have the FBI came by, and the FBI, it was in response to that. It was in response to eating the Quran. The FBI showed up at my door. They were really cool because I started explaining. I said, well, what happened was they said, we're not taking any position on what you've done. We're here to notify you that we have received credible threats. So and they gave me their card. They said, hey, any problem, just contact them immediately and they'll take care of things. So that was cool. I did just get a message from the government of Malaysia that my Quranagami videos have been banned in the country. So yeah, another country has banned Quranagami.
So I guess I got to cross Kuala Lumpur off my vacation list.
Yep.
All right. Anyway, a lot of things left here. In Germany, an Afghan Muslim stabbed his wife 28 times. He then claimed that she had committed suicide, but it seems unlikely. The stabbing, of course, this is something that some ex-Muslims have gotten very angry with me for saying this comes from a culture of violence that is inculcated by Quran chapter 4, verse 34. I stand by what I've said about it. They said, well, the Quran doesn't say you can kill your wife. It doesn't indeed. But once you sanctify any kind of abuse, then you're going to have people who take it too far, and they believe that they're being righteous. And this is the danger of this. There's spousal abuse in every culture, but it's only in the Quran, only in Islam does it have divine approval and sanction, and this is the kind of thing that's going to result.
And as I pointed out, when you combine the Quran allowing violence against women with Muhammad's claim that apostates should be killed, and then you start your wife's on that line of oh, she upset me, but she also does this, and that's not Islamic, so she might be an apostate or she might be a heretic, and so on. You've got the commands to kill and wage jihad against them. You just get the problems that we're seeing around the world.
Exactly. Let me take a couple things as quickly as possible so we can get in some more here. Some kind of interesting stories that are similar. One out of Vienna. The hero of Vienna, a man named Osama Abu el-Hosna, he was given very great honors and medals and awards a few years back because there was a jihadi who was in a shootout with police, and Osama Abu el-Hosna aided the injured police officers, and so he has been hailed as the hero of Vienna. And now it comes out that he has worked for a group that funded Hamas. And so Hamas, of course, is a jihad terror group dedicated to the establishment of Sharia in the land that is Israel. And so it's noteworthy that, of course, it was assumed that he was moderate, rejected jihad, but his rejection was not entirely 100%. Very similar is the former head of the DİTİB, the Turkish Muslim Association in Germany, very influential group. And he has been found to have been on social media railing against Jewish dogs and engaging in all manner of anti-Semitism. Once again, somebody who was assumed to be moderate, turns out there's a bit more to the story. In France also, there's an ongoing situation with the mayor of a small town. There's no way I can say this. Roissy-en-Brie or something like that. This is the name of the town. Francois Bouchard, I can say that. The mayor. He was sitting in his office one day. A man came in, started playing Islamic music on his phone, put a Quran on his desk, and he said, do you have a problem with Islam? I know where you live. It's unclear what exactly this mayor did to arouse the ire of Muslims in France, but he is now under police protection. He said he did not, I did not get involved in politics to endanger my life. He didn't expect this to be happening, but of course, this is the new France.
Yeah,
Meanwhile,
France is getting bad. I mean, every time we come on there, you have like endless stories from France. I mean, France is how is this becoming like the haven for jihad in the 21st century?
well, I'll tell you, David, they have about 8% Muslim population now.
It was rhetorical. I know how. I know how.
These things need to be emphasized. Obviously, no, not all the 8% are going to be jihadis, but whenever you get a large number of Muslims, you're going to get some jihadis. And so France is finding that out now. We're going to be finding that out ourselves very soon. The Islamic State, ISIS, has called on Muslims in the United States to join ISIS North America and to start stepping up the attacks here. We'll see if how that shakes out in the coming months.
Mm-hmm. There's a comment here from Yuri. He says, have you heard this, Robert? He says, yesterday, a misunderstander of Islam in Holland held people hostage, fired an automatic rifle at the police, and had a bomb attached to him. He got killed chasing a brave man who ran away, and he got hit with a police car. You heard that?
No, this is the thing. When you're tracking jihad, there's always more.
Yeah, you can't even stay. This is like the main thing you do, and you can't even stay on top of it.
Yeah, there's always so much that. No, I missed that. I'll have to look for that.
Another misunderstander of Islam.
Yep. So it does seem like there are some particular countries where these things keep recurring. Mm-hmm. France is one. Germany also. I had a few stories about Germany, but I see our time is up. Nigeria, of course, and as you noted, these are all the flashpoints where there are large numbers of believing Muslims, large numbers of non-Muslims, and so there's conflict. And this is something that's played out through 1,400 years.
And so, ladies and gentlemen, we've said it before. We'll say it again. We understand. We understand. There are tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of peaceful Muslims who don't want to slaughter people in the name of Allah. But within a population, there are always going to be people who they study the sources. Most people don't. But there will always within a population be those who study the sources and those who take them seriously, right? Because there are those who study the sources and will just reinterpret things that they don't like. But there are those who will study what the Quran and the Hadith say and say, look, this is what my God and my Prophet are commanding, and therefore this is what I have to do. And when the numbers start rising, those kinds of people become more and more prominent because they also are able to show where everyone else is wrong, right? So once the numbers start rising, the people in the radical groups, and by radical I just mean they're taking the sources seriously, those are the ones who, you don't agree with me that apostate should be well, then you're a hypocrite. You're a hypocrite. You don't take it seriously. Oh, you don't take this part seriously? You're actually an apostate then, and you don't really realize it. And all of a sudden everyone starts having to get on board very, very quickly, or you're in trouble too. You're in trouble too. So that's the sad state of affairs. All right, Robert, any final words here before we close out this week in Jihad?
Just that there's going to be more next week. It never ends.
Yep, sad state of affairs. All you Muslims who are watching, keep in mind, we don't advocate attacks on any of you. You say, we must hate you because we're telling you this stuff. Guys, I want you to know this stuff because I love you and want you to know it. So if you reject it, you can reject the false prophet who is spreading this nonsense, right? If I didn't love you, I'd let you go on serving the most obvious false prophet in history without bothering to tell you. That would be like the most evil thing I could think of. That would be the most hateful thing I could, given what I know about your prophet, the meanest thing I could possibly do would be to not tell you about all the horrible stuff that he did. But as soon as I start telling you, hey, actually, what you say about your prophet completely contradicts what's in your sources, you get mad at me. You literally get mad at me for telling you basic factual information about your prophet, and you get mad at Robert Spencer too, because he does the same thing. Strange religion, and we'll have more about it. Have more about it next week.
Watch this space. Thank you, David.
Mm-hmm.